Good morning. You hear me well?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. They tell me that I better move because you have lunch and you're going to leave. so I'll do my very best to do that. Thank you, David. If you leave, I have two messages for you in here. One is a very fascinating, interesting, technical solution to a real problem in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And number two, that many of the problems that we face as engineers are not technical. They are political. They are ethical. And so I'll try to touch a little bit on that. So we're going to be talking of the city of Venice. The city of Venice is in the northern eastern part of the Adriatic. I'm sorry about that. And so that's Venice there. It looks this way. It's about 130 plus little islands joined by bridges. It was founded around 1,000 years ago by people moving from the north, trying to protect themselves from attacks from the north. The city of Venice is in the center of a lagoon. That lagoon is big. It's 50 kilometers by about 17 kilometers wide. So it's not a small place, but the city itself just occupies a small piece in the center. And there are other cities nearby, as you will see in a second. Left to its own, the Lagoon of Venice would look that way, a marsh. In fact, that is a picture in the northern part of the lagoon, where it remains pretty much like it would have liked to be. Why isn't it this way? Because the Venetians, way back before the 16th century, diverted all the rivers that went into the lagoon. So you see this line here, and you see that line there. That is canals that divert the rivers that went into the lagoons. Why, you may ask, did they divert the rivers? Because Venice, La Serenissima, the Republic of Venice, was a naval power. It was a city-state and one of the strongest naval powers that should resonate with you, not to learn there, of the period. They traded and populated a lot of places. They were great in defending themselves on water. They had no ground army. So they didn't want this lagoon to become a marsh. They wanted this to be a lagoon that would hold their ships to do things. So when they did that, the Lagoon of Venice evolved. I mention this because there's nothing natural about the Lagoon of Venice. The Lagoon of Venice is an engineered environment. Anytime you see a straight line, nature doesn't do straight lines, okay? So in essence, what you have is an environment which is completely engineered. By the way, this is oriented. This is north to the right and south to the left. And I'm going to give you a quiz when I finish why I showed it this way, all right? Anyway, so this is So that's the city of Venice, 50 kilometers, 17 kilometers. The pictures of the marshes were around here. The Venetians did a lot of things, not only diverted the rivers, but they created breakwaters that enter the lagoon in three well-defined areas. If you remember the previous map that I showed you, it was ill-defined. There were no clear entrances. Now there are three well-defined entry points or inlets. The Lido Inlet, the Malamocco Inlet, the Chioggia Inlet. This is the city of Chioggia in here, and there's another city in here. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. So you have this also breakwaters that in every inlet, and further, you had the Venetians built these seawalls to protect the barrier islands. Again, a completely engineered environment. The Lido Inlet takes passenger ships that go through here and go through what is called the Giudecca Canal, which is this big one here, and go there. This is tankers, so this is commerce that go through this dredge canal you see here and go there to this industrial region. And this is fishing boats for the most part that go in there. Because of the diversion of the rivers, the Lagoon of Venice is a net exporter of sediment. So it exports about 700,000 cubic meters of sediment a year to the sea. So the lagoon that would have looked like that, with marshes and so on, really looks like this now. Again, completely engineered. A shallow lagoon. The natural islands simply erode away because there's no supply of sediment into the lagoon environment any longer of any significance. So it just keeps eroding. In fact, one of the things that is done is you build artificial marshes, but once you build them, you have to protect them with walls, otherwise they'll just disappear. So again, the concept of a natural lagoon is something that I want you to remember because I'm going to get back to it. November 4th, 1966, there was a major storm settling over Italy. It flooded all of Italy. It was not only Venice. For those of us that are old enough, and I was a teenager then, will remember that the city of Florence, another great city. Anybody from Italy here? Okay, I love Italy. So, the Arno River spilled over to the city and destroyed all sort of art. So it was all over the place. In Venice, that is the water that was going over the seawall. As you can see, the barrier island of Palestrina almost completely broke through. If it had broken through and those barrier islands eroded, then the whole lagoon environment would have changed dramatically and become seawater. It's otherwise brine. It's a combination of salt. This is San Marco Plaza, the center of Venice, the historical center, the art center, the political center, the everything center is the San Marco Plaza. And that was full of water. This is what happened at that point in November 4th, 1966. And I just want to emphasize that that's the peak at something like 1.92 meters of tide. Now, this is a meteorological tide. It's not your normal astronomical tide. It's effectively the setup of low pressure on top of a natural tide, and most importantly, winds that set up either from the north, that are called the Bora, or from the south, the Scirocco. Okay? Anyway, either way, north or south, it takes water from the Adriatic, it sets it up in front of the inlets. That leads to the flooding of the lagoon. So this is meteorological tides that we're trying to protect against. It still happens, or used to happen. Hopefully it doesn't now. Okay. So that is a picture during the times I was working there. So as you can see, the beautiful San Marco Plaza, this is the cathedral, which is an incredible monument, historical monument, full of water. Commerce gets completely disrupted. It is hard to navigate and walk. You don't know where the lagoon begins and where the lagoon ends in there. So it really became a serious issue. And it became a serious issue because the the frequency of large events, as well as the magnitude of the events, seem to be going up. But there was something else happening. And so this diagram is worth stopping a little bit. This is the height of the tide. This is years from early in the 1900s to 2020. This is the level of the city in 1908, the relative level to the sea, okay? This is the level, the red is the relative level of the city now. So as you can see, there's about 26 centimeters of relative sea level lost. So not only you see these spikes more frequent, storms are more frequent, but you also see that they're larger, and on top of that, since the relative sea level is higher, you have the exceedance, you flood more often, you go over the red line. So that's what was happening. So they realized this, and then they started thinking, well, why? Well, if you think of why, it turns out that those 26 centimeters of relative sea level lost is due to two things. One is sinking of the city and the whole lagoon. It's not just the city. So subsidence. And the other part is sea level rise. Now, there's a story here that is important to keep in mind. What you see in this yellow color is the natural subsidence, that rate. This is years. This is subsidence losing negative values in centimeters. This is the natural rate of subsidence because these are clays and they compact with time. And it goes about 0.4 millimeters a year. What you see in red is the additional subsidence that responds to certain events. And it's interesting to know a little bit of history here. And I'm not going to do the quiz because I don't have time unless somebody can answer very quickly. Maybe I'll ask the professors to see whether they know. Why did the rate increase here, 1925? Anybody quickly? The end of First World War. Well, but at the end of First World War, which was responded to that, led to reindustrialization of the region, and they started pumping water in the industrial site that I showed you, that I said the tankers went there, and that led to an increased rate of sinking of the city. So you should be able to answer what happened there, and it goes even faster. Second World War, right? After Second World War, more industrialization, faster sinking. What happened here? Notice that it bounced back.
Oil prices.
Huh?
No, I see. So,
well, oil prices was in the 72, 73. That's actually not a bad idea, but no. When did the flood occur? The big flood?
oh, I know.
1966, right? 1966, the flood occurs around here. They started getting worried. They figured out they were pumping too much water, and they stopped the pumping. The pumping stopped, the ground rebounded, right? And it rebounded some in there, and now continues at a rate which is consistent with the natural subsidence of 0.4, much lower rate. Now, why did it not rebound back to where it was? Because you're all engineers. Hysteresis just doesn't happen that way, right? It's not reversible in this. So anyway, so that's the subsidence. The subsidence accounts for about half of the 26 centimeters of relative sea level loss. The other half, and frankly the important half now, is sea level rise, which is going at 1.8 to 2-point-something millimeters a year. So it's a lot higher than the 0.4. So the reason why Venice is in trouble is not because Venice is sinking. Yes, it's sinking, but it's because the sea level is going up a lot faster. All right? So there's a PBS documentary that is called, the question is Venice sinking? That's the title of the documentary. Actually, the answer is no. But, or not as fast as it used to be. So keep that in mind. It's sea level. Sea level is what you have to worry about. Now, so the Italian government decided after the flood, it took them quite a while, almost 20 years, to figure out what do we do? We're going to lose this historical, beautiful city. We cannot. The world depends on us to keep this thing, right? And I agree. I fully agree. So 1984, they created a new law. That new law formed a committee. It's called the Comitatone, the big committee, which was headed by the prime minister, and it was all the government ministers largely. And they created something, the Consorcio Venezia Nuova, CVN. CVN was a consortium of the 50th largest engineering and construction companies in Italy, all right? And though they created this company called CVN, and CVN had full control of the Lagoon of Venice for the protection of the Lagoon of Venice. Nobody else could do anything else there. This was CVN's realm by law. Now, keep that in mind because that is, in my opinion at least, good and bad. All right? Again, this is 50 companies, largest construction companies and largest design companies in Italy. I came in 1995, and I was there until about 2014, 14. So a lot of years in there, and I wish I were still there because I miss it. But anyway, so keep that, the Consorcio Venezia Nuova. As I said, the Consorcio Venezia Nuova is a great invention and a bad invention. It's a great invention because it put the private sector in charge of a very difficult technical problem. If, my opinion, I repeat this, in my opinion, without the Consorcio Venezia Nuova, this would have never been built, in my opinion. Now, problems. Two problems. One, you have 50 powerful companies vying for work. And they had masters of the universe, right? They control this whole thing. The other problem is that the financing of this was done by the government of Italy, the central government, annually. So every year you have to request that the budget of the country included a line item to fund this project. So it wasn't that it was appropriated, the whole cost at once. So you can imagine it was a constant, all right, are we going to get the money this year type thing. And it worked. It worked for a while. Until, and I'll tell you when the until came, a lot of things were done to protect the city. There's a whole bunch, and when I say a whole bunch of, I'm talking a whole bunch of dollars and euros, $500 million to $1 billion spent in what I call passive protection, like building artificial beaches. This is the Palestrina. This is where that bridge occurred. That's the original Venetian seawall there. All this is added. You see groins under the water and going like that to protect. Very passive protection. There's also efforts to build up some of the pavements of the city. So I'm not going to talk about any of that. But A lot of money and a lot of time went into that. I'm going to talk about what was done to protect actively against a flood, a predicted flood. So what you had, to remind you, you have 3 inlets. Lido, Venice is here. The Lido Inlet. This is about 1 kilometer wide. Malamoco, the main industrial entrance, is about half a kilometer wide. Kioya is about half a kilometer wide, which is largely fishing boats. How do you protect a small body of water from a big body of water? Well, I like to quote from Man of La Mancha, the musical, where there's one of the musical lines says, whether the pitcher hits the rock or the rock hits the pitcher is bad for the pitcher, all right? And it doesn't matter, that it's bad for the lagoon. You have to control the sea, it's the big guy, that's the rock, right? And you have to maintain that sea outside. This is well-known technology. It's done all over the place. The Netherlands in particular are the masters in doing this. They've done it for years and years. 1/3 of the country is underwater, is under sea level. So massive work. They do it well. This is Rotterdam, and your president, I don't see him here, but back there, spent a lot of time in there. So those are the gates in Rotterdam. One good solution. These gates work. Most of the time, they are sitting on land there. When the flood comes, this thing here, which is like a locomotive, pushes this out, and it gives you the scale of this thing. All right? It's enormous. Pushes this out. They're flooded with water, and they sink. And when they sink, they close off the inlet, right? So it keeps the North Sea, in this case, out from the port of Rotterdam. When they're finished with it, pump the water out, put air in, they float out, and they move them out. Put the machine in reverse, and they go out. It takes hours to carry out this operation, and these things are big. This is the barriers in the Thames in England, protecting the city of London against flooding. Also from the North Sea, the tidal flooding coming up the Thames. And the barriers in the Thames are like this. So what you have is this is sort of hemispherical gates that are underwater, and when they close up, these things rotate up and separate the tidal surge from the sea from the upstream and protect the city of Venice, of the city of London. Very effective, very effective. Why can't we do something like that in Venice? Several reasons. Number one, can we do Rotterdam? We don't have enough land, right? That land is hard to come up with in there. Number two, can we do Thames? We need to be able to move ships in and out all the time. And number three, which is equally important, those other solutions were ugly. This is Italy, after all. And so part of the requirements for this design was that they needed to be as invisible as possible and could not change the cross-section of the inlets because they wanted to maintain the tidal fluxes in and out the same. So that is stringent requirements, right? So the solution that came is something that had never been done before. It's a series, this is hypothetical, this is not the way it looks. But this is an inlet, breakwaters, you see that there, those are the gates in there. I don't know whether to call them closed or open. I call them open. So in other words, they are up. They're keeping the sea from the lagoon. And underwater, they look like this, right? There's this enormous caissons, and I'll show you a picture. Each of these caissons holds 3 of these enormous flaps, and I'll show you a picture. And they operate the opposite of Rotterdam. Most of the time, they're flooded, they're sleeping in their cradle here. And when the flood comes, and you predict a flood, then they pump the water out, put air in, and this thing floods out. And they float out and maintain their hinging here in one point only. So they go back and forth independently. Each of these things is independent from each other. And if you're good engineers, you're going to ask me some questions about that. So I'm planting the question. All right. So the sea is in here, and it allows to maintain the sea higher than the lagoon, and you would save the lagoon. So they would, just to illustrate it, that's the way it is. You plump the air in, the thing goes up, the sea goes up, you maintain the lagoon dry or lower, goes back down, you put the water in, and it goes back to sleep. So that's in there. So that's the way that works. There are really a set of 4, not 3, 4, because the Lido Inlet is 1 kilometer. So rather than having a 1 kilometer continuous thing, what was done, it was an artificial island built, and it was broken in 2 half-kilometer pieces. And then the artificial island was also used to hold all the controls of the whole system. All right. So there's Lido North, Lido South, there's Malamocco, there's Quiolla. Each inlet is slightly different in size. So the gates, the flaps themselves have different size, but they're enormous. Malamocco, big guys. This is the place where tankers go. This is the deepest inlet, right? So these things have to be big. They are 60 meters wide, 48 meters high, and 11.5 meters thick. I'm sorry, this is the interior caissons of the thing. So you can see that this is the caissons are what holds the gates on, right? Where you hinge them. So this, the smaller would be, I think, one of the Quiolla or Lido. Lido North is the smallest, which is 60 by 36 by 8.7. All right. These are big things, big things. This is the way it looks. And this was actually taken before the gates were installed, and I'll tell you how do I know. So what did it involve? Rebuilding the Venetian breakwaters. By the way, so you know, this whole municipality of Cavallino here, which was on the north side, wasn't there before, never existed. What happened is what the Venetians built this breakwater, it caught all the sediment moving along the shore, and it created all this land, right, which became a municipality. So this is brand new breakwater. Interesting thing to see it built. This is artificial island. Oops, what did I do? Oh, okay. I guess it doesn't like it if I press too much. So this is artificial island there, and so the gates go, you see that little notch in there and that little notch there? That's Lido South, and then Lido North in here. Now, I want to point this out because these are massive construction projects. Here, what you have, you see this water area there? This is a refuge harbor. And that harbor is, if a fishing boat gets caught outside in the middle of a storm, they can go in through a lock, be protected, and go into the lagoon. But they use them also as construction sites. So what you have, when you see those gray areas there, those are the caissons being built for Lido North. And what happens is you build them at dry conditions, so you build these enormous things, and when you're ready and it's done, you flood it and they float. You float them out into position and then you sink them where they go, all right? This is Malamoco, much bigger thing. A brand new breakwater here. Look at this lock. That lock was put in there after the fact. This was a design change that cost about, I don't know, $400 million. Because the port of Venice decided that they will not stand for any delays whatsoever for ships going into the harbor, into the lagoon. So when the gates are closed, the big ships cannot go in. So the idea is they hang out there until the storm goes by. But they said no, that cannot be. So that led to the building of this system, this lock, which is not working, and I'll tell you why if you ask me. And the ships going here, and then go through that log through if they want to, right? And by the way, David, this is where I did the simulator is somewhere in this corner. I drove the tanker and going in here. Didn't make it. But anyway, these are caissons. This is the Malamoco caissons. Enormous buildings. These are buildings, right? Enormous things. Look at the rebar. This is like a massive set of rebars. These caissons are built here. Then there's this little system that picks them up from underneath carefully so not to crack them. And it's like little Lego trucks. It comes up, they get under, pick it up very carefully, maintaining exact level so they don't have differential stresses. And then they move it very slowly into there. And that is a humongous elevator. And when they're there, they move the elevator down, they sink it, and the caisson floats, and then they tow it into position. So they would tow it. Ultimately, all these things now are in here, underwater. All right? This is Chioggia. Same concept, much smaller, breakwater, the reconstructed breakwaters. You see the refuge harbor for the fishing fleet. And again, the caissons that go in Chioggia, that go from here to there, were also built in the refuge harbor. So what happened? By the way, this is a gate. One gate. There's 72 of these things. Okay. This baby here is about 5 meters that way, to give you a sense. All right. 5 meters, they're talking about what? That would be 17 feet, more or less. Okay. And then everything you see, including how to move them, is custom made. Right. Now, they were put together by shipbuilders, as you would imagine. It's shipbuilding technology to do it, and move it there and then move into position. So if you see, this is where they're hinged. This is where that end is the hinge end, which is a pretty cool machine. Ask me about it also. So when the gates are operating, this is the way they're working. If this is a flood, notice that that flood actually reached 155 centimeter. At that point, there would have been about a meter of water in San Marco, in front of San Marco. You trigger the gate with the gates to close with a prediction somewhere about 3 hours. Well, it's a constantly adaptive control system, and it gets better as you get closer, obviously. And then when it reaches certain indexes, you trigger the closing, and it would follow that black line. So you see, that black line never went about 100 centimeters, which is the design level. All right, you never, and San Marco should not flood for anything under 120. All right, theoretically, under 120. So that's the way that works. Look at it carefully, look at that black line, because again, that's another question. Let's see how many of you remember all the questions I'm giving you. Where the social component ended up in here, we were doing great, everything was fantastic. We were scheduled to finish by maybe a year later than intended, around 2012. And then 2008 occurred. 2008 was the economy crashed all over the world, right? Remember what I told you. We were funding this thing, the financing was annually with the annual budget of the country. At that point, everybody was bankrupt, including us in here. And Italy was in serious problem. So the money was not flowing. So you have this consortium Venezia Nova, masters of the universe, 50 large companies asking for money, and they had none. And that's where things went bad. Because what happened was that in 2013, they arrested one of the presidents of one of the large construction companies for bribing the mayor of Chioggia, the city in the south. And they arrested the guy, and the guy for something that had nothing to do with the gates. So the guy decided that, boy, if I'm going down, I'm not going down alone. So he started talking, right? And it turns out, and frankly, to my amazement, and I'll make the commentary, when you have billions of dollars at play in almost any country, including the US, and David would know, the construction of the Central Artery in Boston was the same, there's all sort of funny things going on, right? But not, it's levels, and in here, I really didn't expect it. But anyway, it turns out that one of the things that came out was that the Consorcio Venezia Nova, its director, a person I knew very well, and the people who hired me, by the way, I worked for them, was bribing whatever official he could find to get the money flowing, because otherwise you could not finish the project. So you can see how this whole structure, which was very good from one end, really lent itself to temptation and corruption that at the end had a terrible effect, because when this happened, in what I think was a bad decision, they fired everybody. They didn't fire just a few. They fired everybody, including us. All right? End result, remember this when you are the big boss somewhere. End result, all the memory was gone. Nobody knew what the heck was going on. So they created new people, brought new people, or tried to bring new people that had no idea of what was going on, right? The project sat for 4 years doing nothing, rusting away underwater, because it was 95% completed. Everything was done. And it was just sitting in there. But they didn't know what to do. In 2018, they came back and finally saw the light and hired back the main designer who does know everything that goes on. And they started bringing it back. And in fact, Those are the actual gates operating in a storm in 2021 in Kioya. And these are 2021 in Lido. They work perfectly well, and in fact has saved the city. It says 18 times. That was back in 2020, I think, or something like that. Since then, the city has been kept dry every single time that they trigger the closing of the gates. They work exactly as intended. And the newspapers that hated our gods now say, oh, salvation, this is great, wonderful, right? It's very typical. So all of a sudden, everything was fine and dandy. After 20 years of suffering their insults, in many ways. So that's really what happened. So the gates do work. Are they fully completed? No. Because during those 4 years that these gates were sitting underwater doing nothing, one time, these people that didn't quite know what to do forgot to close the hatches in the caissons. These caissons have galleries, right, where all the machinery and all the electronics and everything. And these galleries are, like just almost this height and from there to here. You walk through enormous things. They forgot to close the hatches in the two ends. What happened? In the middle of a storm? Everything flooded. When everything flooded, all the electronics went. This was designed to be operated automatically, basically with very few people. It would trigger the closing based on predictions out of the central operating center. But it doesn't work like that any longer. Now they have to go and send an army of people to press the buttons to make it work, because they haven't replaced the electronics that are completely fried, right? So that's unfortunate. But at the end of the game, though, the city is kept dry. We don't need this pasarela, which are the little bridges that they had to put whenever you were visiting Venice and it flooded, so you would not get wet. You would walk on that. And, as clear as intended, a very challenging engineering project that unfortunately it was tainted by corruption caused by an organizational flaw, if you think of it that way, both in the financing and in the structure. But we have the beautiful city of Venice still living. Thank you so much.